CSS in React. So nothing's changed from the last video. We just have our app component that came with React, and we made our own component, a navbar component. Nice. Now granted, we're about to learn something new here, so I'm just going to get rid of some of the stuff that we don't need for this example, like saying this app was made by Chris. And there we go. Now we just have our navbar inside of our app component. Very simple. So our navbar looks terrible right now. Let's try to make it look a little better. So I'm just going to jump back over into our navbar component and try to figure out, okay, well, I just want to add some CSS. How do I do that? Well, first of all, just so we don't get confused, I'm just going to actually make this a nav tag. And now we're just going to think about, okay, well, how do we add some CSS? So we've been doing that for a while now, so we already know how to write CSS. But good news is it's exactly the same as we've already been doing. So we're just going to make a CSS file for this component, this navbar component that we made. So I'm just going to make one called navbar.css. And there we go. There's our CSS file. And in here we can write whatever CSS we want. But all we got to do is make sure that we import it so that our browser knows it exists. So I'm just going to write import. And then because the navbar.css file is in the same folder as our navbar component, I'm just going to write / to say, look in this folder. And there is our CSS file right in there. So it's called navbar.css. And now we have successfully added CSS to our React component. And that's it. So just as an example, I'm just going to give this navbar a class name. So the only difference is in React, instead of just writing class, you write class name, but everything else is exactly the same. So I'll just call this navbar, sure. And that's it. So now in our CSS file, we can just select that. So .navbar, and I don't know, just so we can see it, I'll just give it a background color of gray. That looks absolutely horrible. Let me try something else. Light lavender. Looks horrible, but we get the picture. We can add CSS that way. And that's pretty much it. That's how we add CSS. Now, here is a cool thing that we can do with React when we're using CSS. And those are called CSS modules. And they're really simple to make. It's literally like typing .module.css. That's the main difference. But what are they useful for? Well, let's say in our navbar, we had, in addition to our what's supposed to be links, let's say we also had a button that said sign up. Great. So we have what we're pretending are links and a sign up button, right? Well, let's make our sign up button look a little better. So I'll just give it a class name and I'll just call the class button. Sure. So then in our navbar.css file, I'll just select our button class. And I don't like the way it looks. So let's get rid of the border and add some padding. And very last thing, I'm just going to make the font weight bold. Sure. Though it looks horrible. But cool, we got our sign up button, and we could add some CSS to move it over, but this isn't really a CSS video. So we have our sign up button in our navbar, but let's say on our page in our app.css component, let's say we also had a button in here that said something like get started. And let's say we're working on an app, we got a bunch of different things in here, and just by chance, we accidentally gave it the same exact class name of button as we did the login button. Now, granted, that might be something we want to do, but what if we actually wanted this to be blue? Well, I'll just make a CSS file for our app component to style everything in our app, and I'll just call this app.css. I just want to make sure I import the app.css in this folder after I make it. Let's say in our app.css, we added its own CSS here. So we had background color blue and color white and font weight bold again. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Now we've accidentally switched the color of this class in two different places. That's not what we wanted. We just wanted this one to be blue, right? Well, this is what CSS modules are for. They can make it so that even though we might accidentally give the same class name to something in two different places in our app, it'll keep those styles separate. So let's take a look at how that works. So CSS modules, how do they work? How do we use them? Well, super easy actually. All we need to do is, for example, let's make this one a module. So literally all we need to do to change this CSS file into a CSS module is literally just type .module.css, and that is how we do it. Now this is a CSS module. So of course we have to update our import now. And the way we actually use CSS modules is instead of just saying import and then the file, we just say import. something like styles from our module file like this. And then we can just use the styles in our class names. So in here, instead of the class name, I'm just going to put in our JavaScript variable. And remember, since this is JavaScript we're adding, we're just going to add these squiggly brackets, and now we can write whatever JavaScript we want. So here's our styles in there. And then we just write whatever class name we wanted. So .button, a button like that. And now we have our specific button class styles from our module.css file. So that's why CSS modules, when you want to do something like that, just knowing they exist in React is super convenient. Let's just do the same thing for this one right here. So I just want to add our JavaScript variable, so squiggly brackets, and then get this variable. We put it in up here, styles. This one for the nav bar, let's see, what did we call it? Nav dash bar. Cool. So this one's a little different because it has that dash in between. Actually, JavaScript doesn't really let you put dashes. And we can tell this is a JavaScript object because we are getting things on it with this dot, right? Now, the only problem is when we get properties from a JavaScript object like this with the dot, JavaScript actually doesn't know what this dash means. So if our class name has a dash in it, then we have to use the other way of getting properties on an object. And that is like this. So this and this are the same exact thing. This is just another way to get properties on an object. But me personally, I don't like writing all this. I think this is just easier to look at and read. So usually I just change the name of my CSS class to navbar like that. I just take out the dash because I don't like the way this looks. So I'll just write navbar like that. And now it works perfectly fine. Now we have the CSS for our navbar back again. And our button below in the app component is still blue, right? Like if we go to our app.css file, we have the background color blue here, even though it's the same button class name. Granted, it's ugly because it doesn't have padding. But yeah, now this is super convenient. We can have two button classes, and if we accidentally write this button class somewhere else, we don't have to worry if we make this a CSS module file. So that is pretty much it when it comes to CSS. There are some other ways of adding CSS, but I thought it was good to know things that companies actually really use as ways to add CSS, but also that are still pretty simple, like module CSS. So please do not make your app look this bad. Choose some colors that work together, not like dark green and blue, but I promise by the next video, I have something that looks a little better, and we'll start looking at state in React. So understanding state is like one of the biggest parts of React, and the general concept of it is pretty simple. So we'll tackle that next, but I hope this was helpful learning about CSS modules in React. If it was and you'd like to support, feel free to check out the link below to my Patreon. And as always, may the odds be ever in your favor and the snacks be ever in your bag. Thank you.